and silence through the night. What a thrill. I'm searching and I'll melt into you. What a fear in my heart, but you're so supreme. I give my life, not for honor, but for you. In my time, there'll be no one else. Crime, it's the way I fly to you. I'm still in a dream, snake eater. Someday you go through the rain, and someday you feed on a tree frog. It's ordeal, the trial to survive for the day we see new light. I give my life, not for honor, but for you. In my time, there'll be no one else. Crime, it's the way I fly to you. I'm still in a dream, snake eater. I'm still in a dream, snake eater.
Hello and welcome to another episode of CRT Sound System. We've got episode 67 and we're talking about Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. I'm here as always with Reese. Reese, how are you?
I'm incredible. I'm personally still in a dream. Snack eater. Yeah, I'm so fucking cranked. I can't even. I'm melting down here with just listening to that here. Anyways, we'll get into it.
Yeah. We've got a guest, Manu. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? I'm over here in Chicago, where it's a balmy like 25 degrees here. So it feels great. 25 degrees Fahrenheit, I guess, just to clarify.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
been
gonna ask.
below zero for the last week. So like it's
Oof.
actually like a 50-degree temperature swing positively up to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. But enjoying it all the same.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's pretty chilly here, but it's a little bit warmer today. It's like low 40s, and I'm just like, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's like 12 degrees Celsius here. I don't know what that translates to in Fahrenheit. But we'll, yeah, it's pretty cold, but not that cold because Ireland doesn't really ever get that cold, thankfully. But yeah, we're here to talk about Metal Gear Solid 3, and who better to get on than Manu. So for anyone who doesn't know Manu, he's a podcaster of some note. But one of my favorite podcasts of the last few years was his Metal Gear Solid podcast, where he went through all of the games. Yeah, I wanted to get him on as a bit of an expert on the series. So I suppose just
The Kojima laureate of the United States.
Oh,
It's
wow,
honestly an
yes.
honor.
Yeah. So I suppose tell people who may or may not know about Metal Gear Solid what Metal Gear Solid 3 is.
Well, Metal Gear Solid 3 is the third entry in the Metal Gear Solid series and the fifth entry into the Metal Gear series overall. When the series went to 3D in 1998 with the PlayStation's Metal Gear Solid 1 or just Metal Gear Solid, the kind of series went into the solid phase because now we're working with 3D polygons instead of sprites on a screen. So I guess that's the origin of the Solid. Metal Gear Solid 3 is the third iteration in this generation of Metal Gear games. The first game featured the story of Solid Snake. The second game featured the story of Raiden, who is kind of a fake Solid Snake. And then we go to Metal Gear Solid 3, which is the origin story of Big Boss, which is Solid Snake's father. And this is a story set in 1964. So like in the heart of the Cold War and a year after the Kennedy assassination and still in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis and all sorts of awful things up the USSR. Just wanted to get that out of the way. So Metal Gear Solid 3 is basically the story of Naked Snake, aka Jack, who is sent into Selino-Yarsk, a fictional location within the Soviet Union, and he is meant to extract a scientist named Sokolov, who has been working on a secret weapon for a kind of splinter faction within the Soviet Union, led by Colonel Volgin, who is trying to stoke nuclear war between the United States and I guess the rest of the world, but also trying to seize power within the Soviet Union. He is in the Brezhnev faction. Anyone who knows anything about the Soviet history will know that Leonid Brezhnev would kind of overthrow Khrushchev, I think a little bit after the events of Metal Gear Solid 3, which actually happened. Anyways, it turns out that this mission to extract Sokolov is actually like the surface level of like 3 other missions. One of them is kind of a deep defection story, the story of Naked Snake's mentor, the boss, going in and trying to recover the philosopher's legacy, which is basically all the capitalists of the major powers prior to World War I saw that a great imperial war was coming. So they kind of all like pulled their money together and hid it away. This money was then kind of like split into a couple parts, one of which ended up being in Colonel Volgin's hands. One of his, I think his father was in the secret cabal of capitalists or whatever, rich businessmen from yore. So that's how he wound up with it. And then the story kind of goes from there. Naked Snake has to infiltrate this Volgin's fortress in Selino-Yarsk, eventually to Groznygrad, where he will face off against this young, hot, sexy little Russian guy named Ademchka or Ocelot. And that as well as the Cobra unit. So the Cobra unit is the boss's, remember Naked Snake's mentor, her special unit. She is considered the mother of special forces, and she had assembled this group of men to initially fight in World War II. They were on the D-Day landing on Normandy Beach, disabling V-2 rocket installations. And each member of the Cobra unit has what I would call almost superhuman abilities. They are basically like the X-Men or the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. They all have one extremely weird thing they can do. So Naked Snake works his way through the forest, through various fortresses, defeats all of the Cobra unit on somewhat mysterious terms, which we might get into a little bit later, eventually shows down with Volgin and the secret weapon that the scientist was building called the Shagohod, which is a kind of a Metal Gear offshoot. Metal Gears being these giant like mechs that launch nuclear weapons, somewhere between like Godzilla or like Mecha Godzilla and an EVA unit. But Shagohod is kind of like on a divergent, part of the family tree. It's more of a tank-based weapon. Eventually, Snake does end up defeating Volgin and this weapon, but then he does have to face down his mentor, who defected like multiple times during the story. But in the end, Snake does defeat the boss. And in the final moments of the game, should I spoil it?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead. Yeah,
it's fine.
In the final moments of the game, you find that the boss basically laid down for Naked Snake to kill her in an effort to preserve both world peace, but also to preserve America's kind of superpower status, their hegemony, and make sure that America was the one who walked away with the philosopher's legacy and positioned itself for kind of creating the world of Metal Gear that follows from this game. Metal Gear Solid 3 is the first chronological entry into the Metal Gear saga, and the kind of hell world, the broken world of snakes and Metal Gears that kind of infests the rest of the game. This is kind of the origin status. The big bad of the rest of the series is a guy named Zero, who is actually your commanding officer in this game. Him and some of the other characters walk away with the money that Naked Snake recovers in the long run, and they set up basically a highly surveilled military state, which in many ways resembles our own, despite the lack of Metal Gears in real world. So I think that's kind of an all over the place summary, but I don't think it's a Kojima game unless it's kind of all over the place in the first place.
No, I think it's good to spoil the game because you really need to have the cliff notes open in front of you for Metal Gear Solid to really get it all in the first playthrough.
This is one of the simpler games out of the series.
No, I mean that is true. It is relatively straightforward comparatively. If I may add, I think what is unique about Metal Gear Solid 3 among the Metal Gear Solid series is that I think it is by far the most robust game of the trilogy, at least until 5. And I think that it is the first one to really deliver on the stealth promise of the first Metal Gear Solid, which is a great game, but if you play through it with modern eyes, it's kind of more of the father of visual novels than it is an actual game. And so much of the actual game part is like you go through a hallway or one map of snowy hills, and then you have a fight with Sniper Wolf or whoever. This is the first time where you really have to kind of sneak through multiple maps, and it could really impact the way that you play to have this. It's not open world, but compared to the other two, which 2 certainly was a bit more of a game that you had to sneak through and find guards, but that one is so avant-garde that it feels more like that's just kind of the setup for the literature of 2, more so than it being kind of a sneaking game. And like the tanker is like a proper little stealth playground, but once you get to the tanker, or once you get to the I forget what it's called, the shell,
plant,
you get it. There's some of that, but it's just a descent into madness of Hideo Kojima just basically predicting the future in a really upsetting manner. So that's kind of the other side of the coin to me is Metal Gear Solid 3 is the most Metal Gear of the Metal Gears. And 4 has kind of its own history that we don't need to get into, and 5 is famously never quite finished, and so there's that neutered promise. So I think 3 is the one to focus on as really the masterpiece of the Metal Gear Solids, and I think we're gonna, at the very least, see it is the most incredible soundtrack of the 5.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it, because I think it is delivering on the promise of stealth gameplay in a way nothing in the series had done before. So in a gameplay sense, this is a massive explosion and outward growth. Whereas story-wise, while it definitely has a bunch of twists and turns and is probably the tightest and best written of the Metal Gear series, it's definitely paring itself down from the insanity of Metal Gear Solid 2. So in some ways, it is streamlining the Metal Gear series, and in other ways, it is expanding and iterating upon it in ways that kind of makes it the Metal Gear that we think of today. This really feels like the first stealth sandbox, where the first couple games are still just 100% based on line of sight, whereas this starts working in things like camouflage, more distractions, and other ways to interact with the environment. Kojima always talks about building his games like environment first and then building back inwards towards the player, and you can see some of that in the first two Metal Gear Solids, but I feel like this is the first one that delivers that promise.
I think too that this game is just in general a musical milestone in the way that the music interacts with the story. It's very famous, and I think most obviously, like clearly supposed to be a James Bond, military
Prestige,
James Bond riff.
yeah.
Yeah, and but within it, I feel like, of course, the other Metal Gears, the music, is appropriate to what's going on. But I just feel like this one it's to the next level, where sort of like the do 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 do, like those little moments like really stand out and kind of drawing you into the game. The ladder sequence is infamous for being just like this little musical touch. And I know I've mentioned this on the show before, but I'd like to kind of underscore the final fight with the boss has this timer mechanic where you have to beat her in 5 minutes. She'll remind you throughout the fight. And I think it's silent at first, and then 3 minutes in, the jam to the theme song will come up. And then I think when you have like 90 seconds left, the lyrics of Snake Eater will come in. And then I think at the very last moment, when she's like the crescendo of I'm Still in a Dream, Snake Eater, that's when the bombs fall and kill you both. It's fucking incredible. I'm cranked just thinking about it.
Yeah, I
Amazing.
think because so the Metal Gear Solid 3 was originally slated to be a PlayStation 3 game, which of course would have far more capacity in terms of what it can do in terms of its audioscape. Obviously it had to be fitted to the PlayStation 2, which is still, from a music player standpoint, pretty solid piece of hardware. But I think you see that Kojima is more willing to kind of engage with the music in a way that he didn't as much in the first two games. I think in the first two games, musically, we just think about kind of like the end credit song and the main theme. And those are definitely important things here. But like now he's layering kind of more instrumentation into his music. Like this one had like full orchestra for some of the soundtrack. You have a lot of like kind of big horns to like kind of evoke the James Bond soundtracks, which is cool. And he also has a bunch of like kind of indigenous whistle and wind instruments worked in there to give kind of that jungly vibe on top of the existing Metal Gear Solid kind of electronic and industrial texture that the soundtrack has in the first two games. So you see him really iterating upon the Metal Gear music that exists, but also kind of like more openly engaging with kind of music that's out there. Something like he initially wanted to get David Bowie songs for the end credits of this game. Eventually he went another way with that. But there's also like Major Zero before he's Major Zero goes by Major Tom. There's a whole part with the Fury, which is basically right out of Space Oddity, the David Bowie song.
Yep.
So I think this is where you start to see him, Kojima, really start engaging with music on a different level in his games. And by the time you get to Metal Gear Solid 4, Snake literally has an iPod that he can listen to music while doing missions. So you can kind of see that evolution of it starting here.
Well, I think too is that Harry Gregson-Williams does put some banger tracks into it, but the addition of Norihiko Hibino being a lot more locked into the soundtrack, I think raises the bar so much. Because even though Hibino wasn't like super into gaming, listening to him talk, he is so tuned into the idea of both communicating and emotion in music. And so Kojima could just be like, I want this to be an angry jungle song, and Hibino would just go into like Mentat mode and come out with these incredible bangers. And I just feel like that's something that Harry Gregson-Williams is such a Hollywood banger smith that it was it's a different assignment, right?
Yeah.
So there's certainly not speaking ill of his contributions to this. There are some key songs here we're about to listen that are incredible. But I think too is that Hibino is really I think among the wider audience is kind of the unsung genius here in everything involved.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of Hibino's stuff outside of Metal Gear as well. In
Mhm.
particular, the Zone of the Ender soundtracks I think are really good.
I just listened to that today. It was incredible.
And like you say, like a lot of those tracks do that same thing of like really sort of dialing into the emotions of scenes.
Mhm.
And like Zone of the Enders is a series that's very uneven, but I think the music is one of those things that sort of really elevates it. And it does so here as well in a very different way. And I think it's worth mentioning with Gregson-Williams as well, just that like it's one of those things that sort of started Kojima's sort of whole Hollywood obsession.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if Gregson-Williams has been put into the machine just yet, but I'm sure it's on the way. But like, yeah, I think especially for 2, like bringing him in, sort of really allowed him to dial into the sort of like the Tony Scott techno thriller aspects of
Oh yeah.
of the Metal Gear series that I think like cinematically, like that's sort of the things that he's drawing from is those kind of movies. So getting in Gregson-Williams, who was like one of Tony Scott's guys. Like he composed movies for Tony Scott's movies right up to composed them for his movies right up to Tony Scott's death.
Yeah.
And like Man on Fire is one of the best fucking movie soundtracks of the last 30 years. It's one of my favorites. I love to go back to that. And like that, getting him in sort of really lets you sort of feel the same sort of thing that you would watching those kind of movies.
Absolutely.
Gregson-Williams, like a lot of people think Kojima got him because he worked on the soundtrack for The Rock, and the main Rock theme has similarities to the main Metal Gear Solid leitmotif, but it was actually the Replacement Killers, the Chow
yeah.
Yun-Fat movie, and kind of the electronic beats that were going in there. That is what convinced Kojima to get him for Metal Gear Solid 2. And yeah, I think he's great. He will work on this as well as the games through Peace Walker, I believe, before Kojima switched over to Ludwig Forsell, I believe, for Metal Gear Solid 5, who does an admirable job, but that's working in a whole different set of leitmotifs and scores. Like the original Metal Gear Solid theme does not show up in the Phantom Pain or Ground Zeroes, except as like bonus music you can get for your walk.
For spoilery reasons, I suppose, as well, that it doesn't show
yes,
up.
Yes, that could also be a reason too.
And like five has that whole thing of like you have all those the licensed tracks as well that are there, so like there's a focus on that sort of and because you have that big open world, you don't really get sort of bespoke music except for a couple of different spots. So yeah, it's a very different
absolutely
vibe.
Also too, I feel like Kojima evolved into his next form by that point and was just it is, I think, shameful to many that he replaced David Hayter with Kiefer Sutherland, although there is a spoilerly reason for that. But I think it's more than just the story reasons. I think Kojima is now operating on a megamind level nobody can understand, and he's just like these specific criteria need to be met. And I don't give interviews like that anymore. I just take pictures of myself and put them on Twitter and just be like, "Watched Minions 4."
Fair enough, yeah. All right, so I reckon we'll jump into the first block of tracks there. Three tracks from Norihiko Hibino and 2 tracks from Harry Gregson-Williams. First track is On the Ground, Battle in the Jungle. Then we have KGB versus GRU. Then we have Fortress Sneaking. Then Operation Snake Eater. And finally, The Pain.
One thing I think about with Metal Gear Solid 3 is just how well paced it is as a game, especially considering that Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 do have some pacing issues near the end of both of those games. But this one is great because the game kind of builds to each boss battle, which is kind of like a climax. And then after that boss battle, it kind of like chills out for like a map or two, and then builds up to the next boss battle, which is a little more intense with more difficult maps leading up to it, chills out a little bit after that, and it kind of keeps going so that it really does feel like each boss battle is just like at the next level compared to the previous one. And it does a really good job of kind of making sure that you're not, I don't know, just kind of spending a long stretch of time either just in maps or just doing boss battles until you get to the end of the game, which is just like 2 or 3 set pieces kind of fused together. But it does a nice job of escalating it from boss battle to boss battle and from maps in between them.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with that, and they flow really well together. And I think like the boss battles themselves too are just like they're all doing Metal Gear Solid bits, right? In any entry in the series. But I feel like you look at a lot of the ones in 2, and it's just like, oh, the Harrier, this is the one with the missiles, this is the vampire fight. It feels a lot way more gimmicky. Like Fat Man is so gimmicky. But in the like each of the boss fights in 3 feel like, even if there's like a gimmick, the pain is definitely a gimmicky boss battle. But it just feels like, I don't know, a lot more robust. It's not unfair with the tools it's given you. It's great. Sorry.
I think that's probably like, the biggest thing with the difference between 2 and 3 in particular is just that like the way the boss battles are expressed and the tools you have to deal with them are much more limited in 2, even though like 2 is a big step up from 1, but even at that, like a lot of the time you're just sort of hiding behind a thing and waiting for the right moment in their animation to do the damage. Where there's a little bit more involved with each of the boss fights in 3, like the pain, like you're sort of having to sneak around underwater and sort of try to get around his bee attacks. Because he sends bees after you because it's a Metal Gear game, I guess.
One on is barely a game. I'm sorry. It's a game. It's a not walking simulator. It was very groundbreaking, but like you play it today and you're just like, oh, all right, it's like 45 minutes of conversation. Let's walk 15 feet and then another. Anyways.
I think especially Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, usually you are the most recent weapon you picked up is what you're using against the next boss. Like you get the pistol and then you fight Ocelot. You get you get grenades, you fight the tank. You get a machine gun, you fight Psycho Mantis. You get a sniper rifle, you fight Sniper Wolf, and then a rocket launcher for Raven and the Metal Gear Rex and all that. Kind of similar with what you're doing in Metal Gear Solid 2, unless you're doing a non-lethal playthrough and then you're just using the trank gun. But here, like you can literally attack any of these guys like in a myriad of ways with the pain. I remember this is where I use my smoke grenades because he uses bees as a shield, but the smoke will disperse the bees and then you can start shooting him with whatever gun. I use the trank because I generally play non-lethal. I think the most fun is the Fear, because he's the one who uses a stealth camo, like he can go invisible, but it drains his stamina. So he has to eat throughout the boss battle, and this is where if you throw out rotten food, because you accumulate food, if you throw out rotten food, he will eat it and then he will get sick, which just massively decreases his stamina, and you can like pretty much take him out with like a couple tranks and some rotten food, which is just super cool. I think one of the things that's always been awesome about Metal Gear Solid is all the characters, whether it's Snake, the bosses, or even the NPC like soldiers, they all adhere to the same systems and the same constraints. So anything that can happen to Snake can happen to any of the bosses or any of the NPCs, which is just a really cool way to build a game.
I feel like the number one example of that to me is the end.
I was going to say,
the end is such a fucking for real sniper boss battle. And I think in many ways, at least for me personally, the most difficult fight, like if you just take it on one, but there's a ton of like ways to work around it. You can kill him beforehand, Like if you can snipe him real quick in that one moment, and then you have to dodge his wheelchair wheel that coming right at you. And of course, the best thing is if you let enough time pass, he just dies of old age there in the jungle. It is really, I don't know. There is something really special about that, the implementation of that gameplay mechanic to me. That if you just keep fucking wiping against the end and you keep at it, you'll just outlast him. It's great.
Yeah.
I've
Just to
actually
go
had that
over
happen to me naturally.
Mhm.
When I was playing the HD re-release, I got to that boss fight and I got frustrated with it, so I just stopped playing the game. And then I came back about 6 months later to try it again, and I got the cutscene where he's just dead.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did pull up some of my older notes on how to fight the end and the different ways you can do it. You can do the traditional sniper battle if you'd like. The way I like to do it is I like to sneak up on him and hold him up from behind. This is how, if you're able to hold him up, you can get his camo. All the other bosses will drop a camo if you beat them non-lethally, but not the end. You have to actually hold him up to get it. You can use the directional microphone to like kind of hear where he is, or you can use thermal goggles to track his footsteps. You can go into the pause menu and enter the Konami code, like up, down, left, right, BA, select, start, and that will mark him on your map.
Oh my god! I didn't know that.
If you see his parrot, you can capture his parrot and then set it free. Because you're able to capture any animal as food, but you can capture them living or dead. If you set it free, it will fly directly to his location. And the thing about the pause, if you stop the game, save it, and then return more than 5 days later, he will have died of old age. But if you do it in between 2 and 5 days, you will end up in jail. Snake will end up back in one of the like buildings that is a couple maps before the end, and you have to make your way back to him. And it's also possible for the end to sneak up on you and hold you up, in which case you also go to jail.
Is that when you get the nightmare? I know that there's a way for you to get the nightmare, and then there's that vampire killing mini game that you play because Snake can't wake up from the nightmare.
So I believe, I can't remember if it's there or if it's later when he's actually in jail after he's captured by Volgin. Just because I believe that, I forget what that vampire game was called, but I think it was only in the original versions of the game, and thus if you buy one of the master collections, I don't know if it's possible to trigger that. But the first
Guy
time I
Savage is what it's called.
But yeah, the first time I played Metal Gear on the original, like an original Metal Gear Solid 3 copy, I got that, and I'm like, what the fuck happened? Did someone write the wrong game onto this disc or something?
Yeah.
It's funny to be thinking that, even though this is my third time with Kojima and knowing he does weird stuff like that.
Yeah, when Naked Snake is placed in the jail cell in Grozny Grad, immediately after being tortured by Volgin, the player must save their game before escaping from the cell. When the save is loaded, the player will be in Snake's dream. So maybe that's not quite connected to the end fight, but still, it's a crazy thing to happen.
That's wild. I've never even heard of that before. There's
The
so
end
much
also,
to this game. It's just, yeah, it's wild.
The end is using the Mosin Nagant sniper rifle, which is a classic Soviet sniper rifle. If you've ever watched the movie Enemy at the Gates with Jude Law and Ed Harris, that is the sniper rifle. But the interesting thing is that he uses non-lethal rounds himself. So if the end defeats you, he's not doing it by killing you. He's actually just knocking you out, which I believe also just sends you to jail. The end, just pro prison guy through and through, just loves sending you to jail. But it's really cool. And then just going back, you mentioned you can snipe him earlier in the game, in which case, if you do kill him there, these sets of maps, because the end is actually fought over 3 maps, which is really cool, something I hadn't seen in video games before. But instead, they get filled with those Ocelot GRU guys. I think there's 18 of them in total across the 3 maps. You can just sneak across it. But being kind of like an expert Metal Gear guy, I always like to try and knock out all of them non-lethally or take them out. That's kind of a fun little challenge. So it is cool. This is where you can really see him playing with the, like, there's infinite ways to play this game, and however you play it, your experience is going to be slightly different than the next person who plays it.
Absolutely.
I guess it's also worth pointing out that the end is the only boss that I believe does not have a soundtrack in this game, or a theme or leitmotif, because of how important sound is to his boss battle.
Yeah, absolutely. That multi-maps thing was crazy within the game, especially because like you definitely the alert levels and the guards and stuff would flow from map to map, but it was still like each different map was like a different load state. So you kind of felt like once you got out of there, you were free. But just being like, well, these motherfuckers 2 screens away. That's crazy. I got to go up to the waterfall. There was a lot that was happening to my tiny pea brain the first time this went through for my first playthrough, just because it it was really pushing the limits of the PlayStation 2. But I'm really glad that they made it put it on the PlayStation 2. Can you imagine if this game was trapped on the PS3? It's fucking darker timeline than we have now. Anyway,
And I do think that is
special.
relevant. Yeah, I do think that is relevant because Kojima's always been about getting the most out of a console. Metal Gear Solid 2 is almost like a pitch for the PlayStation 2 because it was kind of within like a year of the launch of the PlayStation 2. So it was really kind of exploring the new capabilities of it. But here at the end of the PlayStation 2 life cycles, Kojima has a really good sense of how to get every last drop out of it. And I think that is why this game feels like so packed, is because he is using everything that he can that the hardware can offer, both musically and just in terms of gameplay and all that as well.
No, I remember when my friend bought day one PS2. He brought it back to the dorm room and called it the Metal Gear machine.
Yeah, I do think that's sort of an interesting aspect of Kojima. Like for all of the shit that he gets for like people saying, "Oh, he just makes movies with gameplay attached to them," but like I don't think anybody uses the hardware in the ways that he does on like any of the systems that he ever works on. Like I can't think of that many games that use like even just like the analog buttons on the PS2 controller. Like that's but that's like integral, especially if you want to like get all the dog tags. Like you have to be able to do that, and even stuff like using the system clock to do stuff with the end, like all that kind of stuff is it has to be a game. It has to be on a game console for that to work. So like I feel like it's a bit weird to say that he's such like he's so like he's obviously influenced by movies, but like that his games are just movies, because there's so much more than that, and they are like they work as games because Kojima is sort of so interested in getting into the nitty gritty of a system and sort of figuring out all the little tricks he can do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that anybody who says that Kojima just does movies fundamentally misunderstands the medium. I will unironically call Kojima like the Da Vinci of video games. Like I do not have a superlative high enough to pin on that guy's chest. Even though I fear that the only thing that will be left of humanity will be his AI scans of Hunter Schafer et al. But like, even
Just
if you
like
look at
Metal Gear
something
Solid
like
predicted.
yeah, even if you look at something like Snatcher, which is a bit even more kind of like streamlined, you're just sitting there with the experience with various small gameplay elements kind of breaking it up. It's still like really pushing what it means to play the game itself. Even if he wants you to lay back and kind of like experience the story more so than like do button presses or whatever. He's thinking about those inputs, what it's like to be behind the screen like every second. In a way, I don't think people even were back then. I think they had to play Metal Gear Solid to really grasp the fact that there's a player behind the screen every second of every moment of your game.
I think
Yeah.
going back to the first Metal Gear Solid, Kojima talks about this concept of digital fusion, because this is what the PlayStation, the very first one, offered as a multimedia platform. And he talks about how the beauty of video games is they don't have to be one thing. They can have cinematic elements, they can have visual novel elements, they can have traditional video game elements. And what he was trying to do is trying to fuse all those together, thus the digital fusion. And he's always been interested in exploring the entire, I don't know how to call this, surface area of gaming. So that's why you have things like, you have to switch your controller into port 2 for Metal Gear Solid to beat Psycho Mantis, or that Meryl's codec is on the back of the CD case. So
Dude,
like he's always been.
Psycho Mantis telling you what's saved is like, I see you like to play Castlevania. We lost our fucking minds. That was insane. Sorry to interrupt.
No, but I think that just shows like his commitment to comprehensively understanding the medium and like the tools that he's working with starting with Metal Gear Solid 2, and this would be true all the way through the rest of the series, is that he always like petitioned and sometimes got into heated debates with like Sony about having access to higher level libraries or like base level libraries on the system. Usually, the system developers kind of make a set of like tools and like I don't know how technical to get here, but kind of creates like, a firmware or an OS that makes it easy for other games to build on. But Kojima always asked to go more to the base level. With the PlayStation 2, it was the emotive engine known as EE, which shows up in, Emma Emmerich has the codename EE in Metal Gear Solid 2. EE also comes up in Death Stranding. For those of you that have played it, it stands for Extinction Event. But he got access to those base libraries. So because he's doing a lot in terms of memory usage and all that, so he has to kind of completely optimize the performance of the console to get the game to run in a way that he wants it to run.
A friend of the show, Boyne, is a programmer, and she talks a lot about that and sort of the projects that she's working on. That she's always wants to work as close to the kernel as possible, because you get such a stronger result if you're able to control all the tools with the computer. So I've definitely heard of that idea plenty before, and it just speaks to both Kojima's and Boyne's progress.
Excellent. All right, I think we'll jump into the next block of tracks. A little bit of a shorter one. So these tracks are by some made-up bands, I guess. So there's 66 Boys, Sergei, Mantis, and Starry.K. So they are, I'd say, not real there, but they're just bands made up by Norihiko, Hibino, with some of the other people who were sort of session players and sort of things like that in the for the rest of the soundtrack. And I think they're like stuff that you'd hear like on radios as diegetic music more than anything else. But they're sort of interesting. There's a lot of like surf rock and sort of funny little. Sorry, go on ahead.
Old Metal Gear, which is sort of like this very like easygoing 60s version of the Metal Gear theme, plays in, I believe his name is Granin's office, the weapons designer, just like very quietly on the radio, just in there in that like that one small area. So it's things that were, I think, diegetic music mostly, but still they're bangers. There's an Old Metal Gear 10 hours cut on YouTube that I threw on while I was working the other day, and it was perfect.
That's great. Yeah, I think I'd like maybe in a later iteration of this, they would have probably been licensed tracks like the Metal Gear Solid V ones. But yeah, I think it's a nice little touch. So the first track is by 66 Boys. It's called Rock Me Baby. Second track is by Sergei Mantis. It's called Sea Breeze. And the final track is Starry.K and Old Metal Gear. can definitely see why that's something you'd put on for 10 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just nice and chill. I was just like, oh well, you know, I see we already have a chill block, so
Yeah. One thing I actually wanted to sort of go into is Ocelot. We were talking about the boss fights during the last break, and I was saying how Ocelot's probably my favorite boss fight. Not mechanically, but just because it's such a fun sort of scene for him. Like, I feel like he's got to be the most important character in the series, just like in general. Like he's the only one who's in every game, surely, except for like the two original games. Like he's in all of the others, isn't he?
yeah.
He isn't in. I don't think this really matters for your point, but he's technically not in Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, aside from like I think there's one audio tape you can get of him. But otherwise, he is in every numbered game, and I think he's a great kind of like inverse of what the Snake is. Because in every game you play as a Snake character, Raiden will just forget about you for a second, and like even though you kind of have a different Snake in every game, they're all built on kind of the same ideas, right? So you feel the continuity between Solid Snake and Naked Snake and Old Snake and Venom Snake, whereas with Ocelot, each iteration of him is completely different from the other games, which I think is cool. It's cool that you can have someone who returns for all these, but he's just a completely different character in all of them, which is really cool. I mean, obviously Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 4, Liquid Ocelot is kind of there, but in like kind of different ways. But then like you have a young Ocelot, you have a middle-aged Ocelot, you have an old Ocelot for the other games. And usually with a different voice actor each time through, which is kind of cool.
I mean, he's so fucking likable is the thing, and it's just like he is kind of the protagonist of Metal Gear Solid series, the franchise in a way. Like Snake is such a fraught, splintered figure that you know, Ocelot's kind of the only one who's really there all throughout, and he's so much fun. And just be like, the thrill of reloading in battle is still something like I quoted to my friend this year, 2025. It is, and I haven't played 4, so I couldn't tell you about that one. But I think he's so compelling in each of them, and his appearance in this one is in 3 is so fun, where he's a bit more self-serious, but you know, he still has like those flourishes, that sort of thing. It's just incredible.
It is kind of
who doesn't
interesting.
love a showboat?
Yeah, he's very theatrical, which I think is part of the allure. And I always will come back to the fact that he is the first boss you fight in Metal Gear Solid. He gets his arm cut off by the cyborg ninja, but usually you're like, the first boss, okay, this guy doesn't matter all that much compared to someone like, you know, Psycho Mantis or Sniper Wolf or, of course, Liquid Snake. But then it is Ocelot who keeps coming back and ends up being kind of the main driver of the story, especially for the Solid Snake years. Because like Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 4 are all like secret Ocelot plans to either expose and defeat the Patriots, like in conjunction with like the memory of Big Boss and Big Mama and all that kind of stuff. So I guess if you guys are less familiar with Metal Gear Solid 4, Big Mama is actually Eva from this game, Metal Gear Solid 3.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, I guess along those notes, I'm going to admit something that you might not expect from someone who's a very Metal Gear pilled person. The first time I played Metal Gear Solid 3, I did not know going into it that it was the story of Big Boss. Obviously, the fact that it was set in the 1960s threw me for a loop. And I vaguely remembered that there was I remembered there was DNA fuckery with Solid Snake. So I was like, maybe he's been alive all this time, or maybe it's just like the Zelda thing before they created the Zelda timeline, where it's just like we got a Snake, we got an Ocelot, we got a Metal Gear thing, and we just kind of remix them for each entry into the game. And then it kind of took a little time, and then all the talk about the boss, and it kind of hit me on the head. It's like, oh, duh, this is going to be the story of Big Boss. But Big Boss is so important to those MSX games, and it's kind of just a talking point in the first two Metal Gear Solid games. Like, they talk about him a lot, don't get me wrong, but if you're just someone who kind of remembers the gameplay and the boss battles and like the big set pieces fighting the big mechs, you might forget just how much they actually talk about Big Boss in those first two games.
I think it is perfectly understandable. I think for as much as they talk about it and as important as who the bosses are and who the snakes are, like throughout the series, it's been sprayed with fucking memory repellent. I really have a hard time. I've played 1, 2, 3, and 5 multiple times. Like somewhere in my head I realize this is Big Boss that's, you know, from the later games. But it's like in my head every snake is Snake. Every boss is the boss, and you know they play with that, especially in 5. God, they go crazy with it. Now I won't spoil it, but you know I think you can, if you can follow it, it would be obvious if not for the fact that it's so confusing. That it I don't know, and so I definitely understand that, and you're sort of like. But I think that works for the series as well, is that it's always kind of playing with you about that. It's trying to be a bit opaque, and I think that, you know, it of course is a commentary on the sort of like, you know, the generational aspect of war and these characters continually turning into like similar versions of these that they were in the other games, you know, or their descendants were, their clones were in the other games, that sort of thing. And then, then the OG boss that everything, you know, stemmed from, was just, you know, a hot MILF.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Metal Gear Solid, the entire story can just be reduced into a hot MILF makes everyone in the CIA go crazy for the next 60 years. And that's basically the story of the saga.
I love her.
Fantastic. I do find it actually funny you mentioning sort of you experiencing 3 with sort of a misunderstanding of who Snake was, since sort of like they do play with that a little bit at the start of the game. By if you get an option at the start to say whether you've played 2 or not, and if you say you have played 2, it gives you a mask of Raiden, which is it's just a fun little play on the sort of reaction to the second game. So I do find it interesting that you sort of had the opposite, where you were like, oh, is this Snake? Oh no, it's not Snake, but at least it's the old Snake.
Right, which is not old Snake from Metal Gear Solid 4, but it is funny because a lot of video games being sequelized is nothing new, but usually when it's a sequel, it's not necessarily a continuation of the first game. And honestly, you know, being someone who started video gaming in the late 80s and early 90s, you know, those games didn't have the capacity to tell stories until you really got into that PlayStation 1 and N64. And granted, there are games before that definitely told story, but I'm used to like the Final Fantasy series, where each game is its own new story. So I wasn't really thinking about it. And I knew Metal Gear Solid 2, which I loved, went so off the rails that it wouldn't surprise me that the creator would just like, hey, I'm going to just kind of clean the slate and just do something else with the same ideas and characters. But then it obviously clicked that this is all building back towards game. And for a while, this is very common with Kojima, where he doesn't think he's going to do another Metal Gear Solid game, and then he ends up doing 4 or 5 more. But this was supposed to be a trilogy of sorts, where each of the games has their own disparate protagonist, you know, Solid Snake and then Raiden and then Big Boss. It's told out of order. And then you're kind of left as the fan of Metal Gear to figure out what happens in between these games, or what happens after Metal Gear Solid 2. And it was supposed to kind of be like that, kind of like confused all over the place and kind of leaving it up to the user, or player rather. Metal Gear Solid 4 kind of comes in with a wrecking ball to that idea. I know a lot of people don't like Metal Gear Solid 4, but I think part of it is like Kojima, and this might be cope on my part, so feel free to call it cope. But he's like, oh, you want answers? You want theories? You want to know how these all connect? Well, here you fucking go. I'm going to explain everything to a detail that's going to make you hate it. And I think a part of Metal Gear Solid 4 is questioning the concept of fan service, or at least having everything tied out so neatly that nothing is left to the audience. Whether it's effective, whether I'm just making that shit up to like defend my favorite video game series, I'm totally open to that. But I also think there is an element where he's like, you want answers? Here, take these fucking answers and see how much you like it now.
I feel like so much of the reaction to 4 was just also just there was so much hype built up. They thought there was going to be the next expansion of Metal Gear, kind of like how 3 was to 2. You just thought that you were just gonna go cross the whole planet and have a zillion boss fights and a million stealth arenas, and the game is very much not that, right? And I mean, I haven't played it, but that's kind of my understanding. Is it's a lot more of the cutscene goofery, which I really, I really hope they release it for PC, but anyways, the reality is that they are also very similar characters because they're clones of each other. They're not. It's not like Snake is the boss's son. They all are kind of the same person in different formats, right? And so it makes sense that they are going to be, similar in terms of their protagonists. And I saw a Blue Sky tweet maybe a week ago that was quote tweeting like, who is the ultimate protagonist? And somebody said Snake, not clarifying which Snake she meant, and just be like, because she's so clear-eyed and such a great kind of protagonist vessel, and you want so much of the character to be like something you could put yourself in while also having their own outlook. And I think that Snake really fills that. Is that Snake has that soldier's distance, but also is such an expert that you can just be like, the decorations on a gun have no tactical superiority, stuff like that. Loves to give those little owns. And so he's still a character. He's still that guy. But you can also kind of believably see where he will go in whatever iteration in the series of being the ultimate soldier, the leader of the soldier nation, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. All right, I think we'll jump into the next block of tracks. So all these tracks are by Norihiko Hibino. First one is The Fury. Next one is Battle in the Base. Then Clash with Evil Personified. And last track is Taken on the Shagohod. Or Shagohod, sorry.
echoing back what we mentioned about Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, you generally get a newer and bigger gun as you progress through the game, and you use that against the next boss you face. And you try doing that. So, like, the first time I fought Volgan, I'm, like, pulling out my rocket launcher and, like, the biggest machine gun I have, and nothing's working on him because of his, like, electrical powers. He's, like, able to deflect metal bullets, so you can only shoot him from behind, or you have to CQC him to, like, be able to, like, shoot him while he's down. And then I tried the same thing against the boss. The first time I fought her was like, can I blow her away with the rocket launcher or, like, my machine gun? And you find out, like, you just will not beat her. She will just charge you and kick the shit out of you.
Yeah. And I feel like the boss fight, you can eke a win out using tactics like that. But it's just like mastering the rocket launcher on the boss is harder than mastering some of the easier stuff. Like, and she's also, like, really good at stealth. It's really hard to, like, find her in that field of white flowers. So, it's if you can sneak around and, like, put claymores down, like, that's kind of effective. Like, you really need to bring all of your tactical stealth action to bear, and not really go aggro on her to have a fight, because you don't have the time to eke out those wins with the 5-minute time limit, which is more than enough once you know how to beat her. But while you're figuring it out, it's sort of like you don't have the time to. Sorry, what?
It's a little bit stressful with the time limit. You're trying to figure out what works while the clock is ticking down. One thing that really sticks out about those first 3 Metal Gear Solid games is it's not easy to shoot a gun. I mean, I think that's kind of by design. Like, you can pull up your gun in first-person mode, and as long as your target's right in front of you, you can get a good shot in. But if you have to make, like, a dramatic turn, or, like, really look, then, like, your ability to, like, turn slows down, your ability to, like, line up the shot is a little off, and I think that's by design because it doesn't want you to be a shoot first player. Once you get to Metal Gear Solid 4 and especially 5, they just make it fairly easy to, like, target and all that. But I think it's very deliberate in the first 3 Metal Gear Solid games that it is just not easy to just, like, try. Even if you want to blow everything away with your biggest guns, it is just, like, almost physically impossible to do so.
Yeah. And like, you play a lot of it, you can certainly learn its tricks and figure out. I think we've all seen the supercuts of people who just knock out every guard that comes in during an alert, and there's just, like, a pile of dudes there at the doorway. But I think it's good because it's beatable, but sort of like as you're approaching it as a normal gamer, it does have that. I do feel like one of my favorite encounters is actually the Ocelot's team before his fight, because it's not, like, crazy remarkable compared to some of the other stuff in the game, but it's your first, like, real, like, challenge in a way where it's like you can fight those guys and that'll work, but those guys are really tough, and sort of like using your noodle to kind of, like, sneak around and put traps and hide and all that stuff. I think it's really good at encouraging you to do that.
Yeah, I like the way it does that as well. As sort of, you get to explore the space first without them being there, and then, like, you get that cutscene where they show up, and then, like, this sort of recontextualizes the whole space. It's very cool.
Yeah.
They're working with the verticality because there's one of the Ocelot guys gets up on the rooftop and takes up, like, a sniper position. There's a guy, guys patrolling different areas. The interior of Rosviet, I think, is that opening map where you fight the Ocelot. Is called. It's very specifically called Rosviet because that means sunrise. The first map or the first town you go to in Metal Gear Solid 5, I forget the name of it. It's like an Afghani word, but it means the same thing as Rosviet, sunset. So when Ocelot is telling you in Metal Gear Solid 5 to bring the legend back to life, you are literally going to the same place that Naked Snake did in 1964. The first destination is a place called Sunrise or Dawn.
That's great. I love that.
I'd like to talk about I can't believe his name is slipped out. Slipped my brain. Norihiko Hibino
Hibino,
is a composer I loved learning about for this episode. I talked a little bit before about sort of like how much he talks about using music as like a language. He says he's a very shy boy. You know, he didn't like talking to people, and he wasn't good at communicating. So music let him speak what he could not speak in real life. But it really seems that like as he's developed as a composer, he's just so fucking charming. He had a quote I read where he's talking about is like, I did so many action games, and I was just like, so much of my music was about representing violence and tension and fear, and I'm not, and I love that, and I love my career, but I started to think that like, what if I dedicated myself to the opposite of that? And it's a lot of his current output is like he has this business that's like a music therapy sound lab, and he was just like, yeah, I had a friend who had cancer, and so I thought I did a lot of harp therapy with her, and the way he phrased it, he seemed like he was just like, unfortunately she died, like just being like, it really felt like he believed the music could have stopped cancer. And I love that about him. Obviously kind of a tragic story, but it is his main kind of goal now is to find, like the resonance in music that will heal us. And he's got like this album that's all about sort of like the best sleep you can have. And unfortunately, it seems that like a lot of that stuff is tied to like Japanese apps, but you can listen to the music, here in America just fine. And it's definitely, it's really, really good music, but of course it's like very calm, very chill.
Is that
type
the
stuff.
the prescription for sleep?
Yes, I think the other one's called like Prescription for Sanctuary, something like that.
Yeah, I was wondering what those were because
That's
there's a
part of
lot of
his.
those.
Yeah,
Sounds really interesting.
yeah, and well, those are supposed to be like connected to his app, and so
Okay.
that's not an album that you would put on. It's a Japanese app that you would pay for, and then I don't know, it would somehow interact with your sleep patterns. I didn't fully understand it, but the way he talks about it, these very lofty goals. And tying it back into Metal Gear Solid, I mentioned this before, but seems so suited to Kojima being like, I want this to be in to have a 60s vibe, and this fight this is the idea for the pain. This is what you're doing in the pain, and he was able to kind of like grasp what you're doing in the fight. And I heard a radio interview with him. He speaks English pretty well, and he was talking about how he described the fight, and he was just like, he's kind of jumping in and out of stealth. So, you need something where you have that tension and you're able to look behind you and sort of like have that fear. And I just think it was so compelling to have a composer. I don't want to suggest other composers don't feel the music that they're doing, but it seemed like he very earnestly, emotionally approached these different tasks that Kojima gave him, and just like really wanted to feel the things that he was assigned to show. And the other thing that I think was such a good fit for him is that he said the main thing that he was influenced by that made him want to become a musician is jazz. He said Coltrane was the singular artist that got him into composing as a kid, or just into music as a kid. And he was talking so much, he's like, I love jazz, but I have nothing against 80s jazz, but I love the 60s and 50s jazz because the music has a lot more of like a singular forceful voice, which I thought was really interesting, where it's like he's not trying to do some of these more complicated like musical ideas executed into something kind of pushing the medium forward. He wants a song with horns that's about anger, and he wants to just execute on that as hard as possible. And so I don't know. I thought it was really special learning about this guy, and I think that he was perfect for Metal Gear Solid 3. And it wasn't his first soundtrack, but I think his first soundtrack was Metal Gear Babel, or it's called something like that.
Ghost Babel.
Ghost Babel, yes. But he said like the reason he accepted that, he'd never played video games, anything like that, but he went to the Berklee School of Music. But when he left, he didn't have access to Pro Tools and all this equipment. So he's like, if you hire me, if I work as at Konami, will you buy me Pro Tools and this like laundry list of expensive technology? And they were like, yes. And so he's like, that was my number one motivation. Other than that, I wouldn't have gone to work for Konami.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I kind of want to sort of talk about the pachinko of everything. So we have the next block which is coming up, which I wanted to throw in because I think it's something Konami has gotten a lot of shit for, rightly so. Is just sort of they pivoted about 10 years ago to just having everything be just pachinko games and or PACHISLOT, I suppose, and not actually doing anything. But I did discover that a lot of these have fucking excellent soundtracks, that are like done by like oftentimes the original composers, but like whoever's with the sort of Konami music team these days. So I guess the question is, can love bloom in the pachinko parlor? What do you?
No.
I mean, I would say no, but you know, the non-love can have a banger soundtrack.
And the other track in the block then is going to be from Super Smash Brothers. And again, we included a random Super Smash Brothers track in a recent episode, and it was great. So I was like, I got to throw this one in too.
I think if there's a Super Smash Brothers song, that's going to have to become a new regular thing for the show. Yeah.
Have either of you played Pachinko or PACHISLOT?
Not in any meaningful way. Like when I visited Japan for vacation, you know, like I put, you know, 100 yen in, and like there were noises and something happened, and then it just like I had nothing at the end of it, and I was like, cool, all right, let's go play let's go play some rhythm games. Like I did not get it, but
fair enough.
Clearly it's more of a cultural thing. That, you know, I don't know. It seems very dreadful, to be honest. But
but yeah, I mean, definitely go and check out the soundtracks. There's some Castlevania ones, and this one. I think there's one other. I'm forgetting what it is, but yeah, like just really, really good soundtracks, and good sort of versions of these soundtracks. So yeah, we'll jump into that anyway. So from Smash Brothers, we have Snake Eater, which has been arranged by Nobuko Toda, and then we have another arrangement of Clash with Evil Personified. We have Sidecar, Escape from the Fortress, and Sokolov Rescue. All of those are credited to KPE Studio, because Konami loves to not credit people for their contributions. So we'll jump into those.
One final thing before we jump in. Hibino, they asked him about working with Konami on the remakes, or the, you know, the Delta remake rather. And he scoffed about it. He was just like, they want nothing to do with me. I want nothing to do with them. You know, I don't own the rights. I'm sure they're going to do something with it. So I just thought that was a funny touch, where he's just like, even Hibino was just like, oh, fuckers, I can't believe what they've done. You know. Anyway,
incredible.
Can't wait.
All right.
this like I spent what like 3 years of my life like researching and writing all this down, and it's like all flooding back to me now. It was just like I'm like
yeah, I mean,
Good. Yeah,
I'm absolutely going to check out your podcasts after this. Metal Gear Solid and Game of Thrones are like my two big freak interests. So I'm
I will say as well, for the Metal Gear Solid podcast, like it's so refreshing to have like leftist analysis of games in such detail. So like definitely if that's your vibe, Reese.
honestly,
I mean, it
it's,
has to be leftist for me to tolerate it, unless it's an Amazon Prime show.
Yeah, no, honestly, like even like I've like considered myself, on the left for a long time now. But when I did this podcast, I was still kind of like a baby in terms of like how much theory I had read and how much history I knew. And this podcast is actually why I started digging into history a little deeper. It's like, oh, Gray Fox is from Rhodesia. What's up with Rhodesia? And it's like, oh God, oh no. And then that kind of just led me into this point where like history is like the main thing I read now and the main thing I tweet about. But it all kind of started with doing Metal Gear research. There's just so much to go off of. But I think you'll like it. First, our coverage of the first Metal Gear Solid is we were still finding our podcast legs, but by the start of Metal Gear Solid 2, we are fucking locked in. Like I am so proud of the work we did there. One thing I'm going to go back to actual podcast, like this podcast now. So one thing that I specifically love about Metal Gear Solid 3 is one of the challenges Kojima starts building into his game, starting with Metal Gear Solid 2, is a non-lethal playthrough. So you could theoretically go through these games without killing anyone. Of course, like there are boss battles, but the story of Metal Gear Solid 3 is that Snake defeats the Cobra unit guys, the Pain, the Fear, and all of them, but he doesn't actually kill them because they all explode at the end of their boss fights. And what's actually happening, it's a little bit of the Anakin and Shmi Skywalker thing where they all have bombs implanted in them, and they all blow themselves up at the end of the boss fight. So it's technically not Snake killing them. They are meant to die at Snake's hands as part of this narrative. So you can go through this entire game and not actually use lethal force at one point until the end when you defeat the boss and she is lying there on the ground, and then you have to pull the trigger on that, like a lethal shot. It's part of, it's half like cutscene, half gameplay. But I really love the fact that if you play this game non-lethally, you still kill the boss, and like what that might mean to Naked Snake's psyche. Obviously he goes on to either become this great liberator or great war criminal, depending on like how you interpret the rest of the saga. But it is so cool that you have to kill her, even if you don't kill a single other person in all of this game. It kind of really puts an exclamation point on that non-lethal playthrough, that you can't get around it here.
And the game does a good job of kind of bubbling that idea to the surface with the Sorrow encounter. It's not even really a boss fight. For those who are unfamiliar, the Sorrow is kind of built up as one of the members of Cobra. So you think you're going to get into a boss fight with him, but you just walk down, I think you're in a river or something.
Yeah.
And just the ghost of everybody you've killed walks past. And if you have a lethal playthrough, that's going to take a minute or two for you to go through and see the ghost of everybody that you've killed. In a non-lethal playthrough, it's a quick jaunt. You don't see anybody. It's honestly inspired. And so for that to kind of lead into this moment with the boss is incredible. Great point to bring up.
Yeah, Kojima's always like going to Metal Gear Solid 1 after you take down Metal Gear Rex. Liquid Snake kind of monologues at you for a while, and he's telling you, you love this violence. You love shooting your gun and killing people. And that's like the first where Kojima's really like confronting the player with the violence that they are perpetrating, because I think he's very aware of the fact that he is making violent video games at some level, and that's why after that you get to play non-violently through the rest of the series. So he always wants you to actually think about the violence, and that's why I went back to how all the pieces of this game, they all are subject to the same systems. So the NPCs, they fall asleep, they can get sick, they can be distracted by nudie magazines, and it's all there to remind you that these are actual people, whether you're tranquilizing them or popping them in the head. I think he wants you to think about that, and he really develops that theme so profoundly as he works his way through the series.
Absolutely, yeah. Right, I think we can probably finish up with that. I think that's a very good point to end on, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you would like more points about Metal Gear Solid 3, what's the name of your podcast, Manu, that delves into it all?
Yeah. Should I just plug all my things now here? If this
Plug all your things
everything,
now.
yeah.
I'm trying to segue into it.
Yes.
Tom usually does the segues. I'm not as good at it.
You're doing great, Reese. You're doing great.
Thank you.
So yeah, I have a lot of podcasts. If you're really into Metal Gear Solid, which I assume if you've been listening to this episode and all the stuff I've been saying about it, you should check out Podcast Sans Frontiers. Very great SEO there. There's neither a Metal Gear or Solid in the name of our podcast. But yeah, Podcast Sans Frontiers, podcast without borders in French. If you're a real Metal Gear sicko, you'll know where that's from. But we covered all the main Metal Gear games, so Metal Gear Solids 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We also covered Metal Gear Solid Revengeance, the Raiden slasher game, as well as Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which is canonical to the series, but not a numbered entry officially. There are also a couple spare episodes in there, like we covered like the Batman movie when it came out, and we did an episode about James Bond because of its influence on Metal Gear. Other work I do, I also have a podcast about A Song of Ice and Fire, the books that Game of Thrones is based on, and yes, we talk about Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon as well. That is not a cast, not a cast as an NOTA cast. It's a name, but it's not.
That's a bit of a pull there.
Yeah, because
that's a reference to George R. R. Martin's blog. It's called Not a Blog. Which is a hilarious affectation because it is a blog. It's where he does not answer anything about Winds of Winter, and he's just like, "Oh, the Giants have gotten screwed again." Anyways, let's talk about wild cards. That's every post.
Yes, and
anyway,
I also have
sorry.
No, you're good. I also have a Lord of the Rings podcast. My brother, my captain, my podcast, where we kind of go through the movies, the 3 Lord of the Rings movies, kind of one chunk of scenes at a time. My co-host Emily, who lives in Scotland, she is a Tolkien master and she knows everything about the books. I am obsessed with the movies. It's really great time. And then just going back to the Metal Gear Solid one and A Song of Ice and Fire, I think Hideo Kojima and George R. R. Martin have a lot in common in terms of the art they produce. They both grew up in the same time, like Cold War through the Vietnam War, watching the rise of the American Empire, the fall of the Soviet Union. I feel a lot of that is kind of built into their work. So I talk about both of them at length in relation to each other. So if you like both of those things, I think you will enjoy both of the podcasts.
Excellent. Reese, you can plug anything you want to plug at the moment, or are you still on?
Check out Video Games Are the Worst Thing on Earth, a leftist video game culture and mental illness podcast. We're getting progressively more normal every day. We think we got another episode of that coming out soon.
Is that the one that I recorded with you? Because I feel like that turned into a fever dream by the end.
They turn more and more into fever dreams every episode. As gaming descends further and further into Grumzest darkness. This podcast, what you're listening to right now, you should check that out.
Definitely check out CRT Sound System. Thanks so much for listening. You can find us at patreon.com/CRT Sound System. Come and join us in the Discord if you want to hang out and talk about video game music, or come on the show. Come tell us what you want us to talk about, and we'll probably find an excuse.
Yeah, I just witnessed in the Western Kabuki Discord somebody being like, "You should do Nier," and just been like, "Well, come on and do the Nier episode."
Yeah, it's like
And
my
the guy was
general
like,
rule
"All
is
right."
if you yeah, absolutely. If you want me to do something, just you got to come on the show.
yeah, yeah. If you want Undertale, the Undertale episode, come
Yeah.
on and make us do it.
Force us by gunpoint.
Exactly.
Uh, all right, so the last track is a licensed track. Actually, it's by Starsailor. It's called "Way to Fall." It's an interesting track. Like, I don't know where he found it from because Starsailor were such a like also ran post Britpop band. Like I remember they had one big single. I can't even remember what it was called, and then like they sort of just faded away. And then the next time I heard of them was in the end of this game, with Way to Fall. Do you have any sort of insight on where Kojima got this from, or sort of why he used it
So
specifically?
not specifically on Way to Fall, but for the first two Metal Gear Solid games, he had an original song created for the end credits. For Metal Gear Solid 1, it was The Best Is Yet to Come, which is, I think, perhaps the most beautiful song I've ever heard, and that's sung in Gaelic and is this big sweeping epic. Metal Gear Solid 2 has You Can't Say Goodbye to Yesterday, which is kind of an American jazzy, got a little bit of horns and all that. This is the first time he's using licensed music or music that exists outside of, being written for Metal Gear Solid. He really wanted this to kind of be his David Bowie game. That's why, the opening bit with Major Zero, he first goes by Major Tom. That's why the Fury boss fight has bits of Space Oddity kind of built into it. That David Bowie song. So for this game, he initially wanted to pick one of David Bowie's Major Tom songs, because that's a recurring character in a bunch of his music, most notably either Space Oddity or Ashes to Ashes. But I guess something just kind of clicked with this, or maybe something did not work out with the Bowie estate. Hard to say. But either which way, we can all be happy that Metal Gear Solid 5 kind of ends up being the David Bowie game in its own way, because of the prominence of The Man Who Sold the World and Diamond Dogs within the story and some of the music in there. But I just think something hit with Way to Fall. And I think he's really taken with what the whole sacrifice of the boss means. Because I remember he kind of went feral when The Dark Knight came out, with the Christopher Nolan movie, because
As did we all.
at the end of the movie, Batman's like, I'm not a hero. I can be something more. I can take the fall for everything. You can keep the image of Harvey Dent pristine or whatever. I can be those things because Batman is a symbol, whatever. And he's like, oh, that's the ending to Metal Gear Solid 3. That's basically what I did with the boss, where she was the symbol who could take the fall for everything. And I think it is one of those things where Way to Fall is kind of the key operant term here, because it is showing what the boss is able to do, that she's able to take the fall for all this in her dream, in her way of, she thinks she's saving the world or making the world better. Little does she know the CIA never makes the world better. But alas, I think it's thematically poignant, even though it does seem like a last minute switch on Kojima's part.
Okay, interesting. So thank you so much, Manu. It was really good to finally get you on. I feel like it was about 2 years ago where I actually initially reached out to you about this, and then things always just get put on the wayside of this. So yeah, really good to finally have you on, and I'd love to get you back on again for something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pure delight. Especially, I'm excited to listen to both Not a Cast and the Metal Gear Solid podcast. It's just extremely excited for such a thorough digging into the greatest video game ever made.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you so much. It was a blast. I'd love to be on again. I will think about what other games I played besides Metal Gear Solid. I feel like if I mentioned Metal Gear Solid 5 or Death Stranding, I think I would get you guys permanently banned because it's all licensed music and you would get so many what are they, DMCA things like leveled against you. But
it'd be maybe a Patreon one.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe, yeah. All right, so yeah, last track is Way to Fall by Starsailor. Thank you so much. Good night.
Son, you've got a way to fall. They'll tell you where to go, but they won't know. Son, you'd better take it all. They'll tell you what they know, but they won't show. Oh, I've got something in my throat. I need to be alone while I suffer. Son, you've got a way to kill. They're picking on you still, but they don't know. Son, you'd better wait to shine. They'll tell you what is yours, but they take mine. Oh, I've got something in my throat. I need to be alone while I suffer. Oh, there's a hole inside my bones. I need to stay afloat for the summer, Lord. I've got something in my throat. I need to be alone while I suffer. Oh, there's a hole inside my bones. I need to stay afloat for the summer. Son, you better wait to fall. They'll tell you where to go, but they won't